are glitches, then just bear with us. So we have 3 agenda items this evening. And the first one is an update on the status of and the process for the school budget in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. So the superintendent and Roberto and I met with the mayor and the city manager and the finance committee chair of the city in a conference call recently on Tuesday, I think it was. And we just had some questions about our process now. As you know, the city charter requires us to jointly meet twice during the budget process. And I think the first one has to be within 30 days of when the superintendent presents his budget. So we have some issues around that with regard to what we're legally required to do. And beyond that, we met with the city, and their budget process is basically on hold right now. They expressed to us concerns about revenue. They're not collecting fees right now. They have a significant drop at the jet port for revenue. They've pushed off property taxes. And so for a number of reasons, they're not collecting revenue. They have no idea when they're going to know what position they're in. So they've just kind of put everything on hold. And they expressed to us that their preference is just to kind of put everything on hold and basically not meet with us for our joint finance committee meetings. So Javier or Roberto, do you want to add anything in summary to our meeting with the city?
So I mean, I think you covered it pretty well. Those were the key points. There was also some concern raised just about the how the community would feel about us moving forward with the budget, which is something that I think we need to consider, and that's more of the political side of it, I guess. But I mean, that I felt was something that I'd rather just hear from board members how they feel about that. In terms of whether they feel we should advance restarting the budget process, or we should kind of understand the city's reservations and their sense that there's so many uncertainties around it, and that's enough reason to pause everything at this point.
And that for tonight, so we're just going to go over the context of the budget as it relates to COVID-19, and then we'll be asking the committee for your feedback, just as Roberto said, in terms of how much depth do you think we should go into the budget at this point, when you think we need to get there. And then lastly, I think there are some, Javier and Miranda will be able to present some scenarios or ideas for direction on the budget going forward. So I'll just, I think Javier has, if everybody has their agenda up, there's a presentation for us. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Javier.
Okay, I didn't know that I could unmute myself. I guess I can. So I guess a couple of things, before we get into anything else, is to really understand. I know that Chair Rodriguez said that it is, to some extent, we have the option of not continuing with the budget process. And I think it's important for the board to understand the implications of doing that. So Miranda, can you go to the next slide?
Sorry, I wasn't sure if I shared the right screen. Just let me give, was it on the right screen? Was it the finance committee slide?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, let me do that again. Okay.
So Anna talked briefly about the charter requirements, and they're a little bit more extensive than that. The charter specifically says that there need to be 2 meetings between the finance committees. First it says that the budget has to be presented, the superintendent has to present a budget, by mid-March, which we did. And then it says that there have to be 2 joint meetings between the time that budget is presented and within 30 days. So it's not a single meeting, there have to be 2. And so at this time we don't have any of those meetings scheduled. And so, we right there, I think, are at risk of not meeting the charter requirements. And then a budget has to be submitted to the council by the last Monday in April. Again, that is in the original, that's in the charter, and that was in our timelines, and that's predicated on the board going through its process and actually having a budget to submit to the council in order to have the council act on it so that it can go to the voters. There has been, I guess, to some extent, disagreement between our understanding of the charter requirements and the city's understanding of the charter requirements. So I asked our legal counsel, Bruce Smith, to join us today so that he can talk about his perspective on that and maybe share a little bit of what he, as he's had conversations with the city's attorney about their interpretation, so that we can make sure that you understand that. What are the implications? Then we're going to talk about the budgetary implications if we were to not have an approved budget by July 1st. So, Bruce, do you want to talk a little bit about your conversations, your understanding of the charter requirements, and your understanding of where we currently stand, even with 21 with LD 2167 that was passed by the legislature last week?
Sure. Can I be heard right now? Good. This is becoming a somewhat complicated matter, but there was emergency legislation passed to attempt to deal with several issues related to COVID-19 and its consequences and how it's affecting the approval of municipal and school budgets. There are 2 primary relevant sections in that law, one of which says that if the municipal budget meeting is delayed due to public health issues related to COVID-19, then and it's delayed to beyond July 1st, then the municipality may operate under the previous year's budget, even though no new budget has been approved. Now that's the municipal budget. The problem is that that doesn't apply, we think, to the school budget. Now, this can get a little bit confusing because we know that the school budget goes to, you present it to the council, and the council has to act on the bottom line of that. And then after that, it goes out to the voters in a budget validation referendum. The school budget doesn't actually become finalized until the voters approve it at the budget validation referendum. That has to occur within 30 days after the council approves it. So, and also generally speaking under state law, schools have to approve budgets. School boards or the legislative body of the school has to have a budget approved before the end of the current fiscal year, before the start of the new fiscal year. There are a couple of exceptions. One exception is if the budget fails at the budget validation referendum, you must then go through the process again, but if it isn't completed before the new fiscal year begins, then you can operate under the last approved budget. One exception. Another exception is if the Department of Education doesn't finalize the state subsidy on a timely basis. You have to know what your subsidy is in order to build your budget. You've already got a preliminary report on that, and I don't think they haven't put out the final subsidy amounts, but they're ready to do so because the legislature has approved the budget for next year, the state budget, so they know what the numbers are. Now, there is a provision in this emergency legislation that says that if the subsidy is not finalized by June 1st, then it's possible to delay the school budget approval. We don't have any reason to think it will be delayed until after June 1st, unless they make a deliberate decision to put it on hold. And I haven't heard any indication that they're going to do so. So that's a somewhat long-winded way of saying, even though I haven't gotten into all the details, of saying that despite the emergency legislation, there isn't currently any clear legal relief from the existing statutory and charter deadlines. The charter that's up there on the screen right now, those charter provisions remain in effect. They haven't been eliminated by the emergency legislation. The charter itself does not provide authority to the council or the city manager to waive any of those deadlines. So strictly speaking, as a matter of law, those charter provisions are still in effect. And also the obligation to at least attempt to have a school budget done by June 30th is still in effect. The city, I believe, is operating under that provision I mentioned previously, that they believe that they need not finalize their budget by July 1st if they can't do so due to public health concerns arising from COVID-19. And I think they're relying on that to sort of put everything on hold. What our problem is that, as I just said, I don't think that excuses the board or the city really from the school budget timelines. In speaking with the city attorney, she wasn't able to point me to anything that does explicitly excuse the board or others from that. Now, it may well be that they're willing to sort of operate under the assumption that those deadlines will not be a problem when you look at the larger perspective about the crisis we're in and the overall, the ultimate intent of the legislature to basically, in simple terms, cut municipalities some slack on going forward. But my concern is that anytime you approve a budget, you really want to cross your T's and dot your I's, because if there's a flaw in that approval process, or arguably a legal flaw in it, that can provide a route for challenges to occur, alleging that you didn't have the authority to tax on the basis of that budget, or that you don't have authority to spend on the basis of that budget. And those, theoretically could come from anywhere, from someone who doesn't like the budget you've approved. So the cleanest way to do it is to try to make sure that you've either observed all those deadlines, or you've gotten legal relief from those deadlines. So there are two possible routes for getting some legal relief. One is to ask the legislature to clean this up. Right now, I don't think we can count on that happening. Legislature's in recess at least till March 30th, and we have to assume they're going to extend that recess. So we can't count on them getting back together on a timely basis, nor even if they get back together that they'll really solve the problem for us. Another route is to ask the governor, under her emergency powers, to give some relief from these deadlines. And I think she probably does have that authority. One of the parts of the emergency legislation is a new provision which adds to the governor's emergency powers, that allows her to reasonably adjust timeframes and deadlines imposed by law for state, county, and municipal governments and other entities. I think under that provision, she could probably give this relief. So our thinking and discussing it in the firm amongst the school and finance lawyers was that probably the best route would be to ask the governor the next time she issues an order, and I guess she's trying not to issue new orders every day. So we would try to piggyback this on the next one. The current order regarding no meetings of 10 or more people, and the more recent order saying that no businesses except essential businesses may operate, go through April 8th. I think it's reasonable to anticipate that those will be extended, and there'll have to be another order. So we may be able to piggyback on that next order to add a provision, just a very simple thing saying that school budget deadlines are waived as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. Our thinking was to go ahead and request MSMA to propose that to the governor, and we also have some direct contacts with the governor's office that I think would make that possible, and we're pretty optimistic that could occur. So that's essentially my report. Any questions about that? So if there aren't, and there are no objections, I think we'll just go. My plan is to have something in writing, which I'll share with Javier tomorrow morning, and that we would ask the governor to add to her next order. I understand that the city doesn't really want to go forward with those 2 joint meetings that the charter says are supposed to occur. So if they really don't want to do it, I don't think you can force them to do it. And if we can get relief from the deadlines, that won't be a problem. Now, obviously you folks are going to have to talk about, if you don't have to meet these deadlines, if you don't have to have your budget done by April 27th, essentially, how that's going to affect how you go forward from here. That would be your decision.
Thank you.
Okay, so any other any questions or comments based on that?
So one thing I'm noticing, Javier, is while the screen is in presentation mode, I can't see if anybody's raising their hands. So maybe we just wait until the end of the presentation for.
Or you can open the participants tab down at the bottom.
Oh,
okay. See, at this point, Emily has her hand.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay, Emily, I'm unmuting you.
Great, yeah, and thanks, Bruce. I think having the time is critical. Just thinking about the bill that passed the Senate, I'm losing track of time, but I believe last night now, just noting that it has $150 billion for states and local governments for new expenses related to COVID-19, as well as $30.75 billion for grants to provide emergency support to local school systems and higher ed, and also $8.8 billion in additional funding to ensure meals for children continue while schools are closed. So just even understanding what the implications of that might be. The bill hasn't yet passed the House, so it feels like we're in such a period of intense crisis, and then also of some action at the federal level to address the acute needs. It would be really hard for us to move forward at this point.
Marnie?
Thank you. Thanks, Bruce, for that information. The question is around what you were just explaining. Is it related, it's just specifically to Portland because of our charter, or are other districts faced with the same difficulties right now with their budgets?
Yeah, other districts are facing similar issues. Everyone has to face the issue of the statutory obligation to at least attempt to pass a budget by June 30th. Now, just anecdotally, different districts seem to be reacting in different ways. Some are trying to get their budgets done as soon as possible, which presents some challenges, but I think the thinking is the state budget has been passed, they've got a subsidy amount, and they just assume get their budgets done sooner rather than later and deal with whatever may follow as it follows. Now, in Portland, I think we're seeing the early reduction in revenues that's causing the city to be quite worried, understandably. And the response in Portland is, well, let's not rush this through. I think in some other districts, the attitude is, well, let's get it done and get our budget locked in. And then we'll worry about what happens later. But it's a concern across the state. I mean, the deadline issue concerns some other cities and chartered municipalities do have charter provisions that they have to worry about, just like you do.
Tim?
Thanks. Can you hear me all right? Sorry. Okay, great. I guess if it's okay to move on from the legal side of this, I'm curious about the operational impact of having a delayed budget. I don't know if that's where we're going next, and I'm getting ahead of things, or if that's fair game to ask now.
Yeah, I mean, we're prepared to talk about what the implications are of both a a budget with no increases, which would be the bottom line, so 0% tax increase, but also I think the more problematic one of if we were to need to operate with this year's budget, particularly, and I think this is where Bruce made this point, and I think it's important to underscore, particularly if we were to violate the terms of the charter and somebody took us to court on the basis that we did not follow the charter, did not have relief from the charter, and therefore could tie us up in court for a prolonged period of time, forcing us to operate under the current year budget. So it's less of a concern to just start the year with that current year budget and then, get a new budget passed on July 15th or on July 26th. That's less of a concern than if we are held up in court and need to operate under that budget for the length of the school year or for a prolonged period of time where we would run into difficulties being able to maintain our operations as they currently, as they would go forward. So anything you want to add to that, Bruce? Is that accurate in your understanding?
Yeah, I think it is. It's just, it may be unlikely to happen, but anytime there's a cloud over a budget approval, it creates some degree of risk. And if we can lift that cloud, that would be the best situation. And while still accommodating the city's desire not to rush through on a budget.
And I think that that's where I think the suggestion that Bruce made of trying to formalize the relief from those charter provisions is critically important, because without that, we run that risk, which is, again, to Bruce's point, it's a cloud, and you want to avoid having that cloud. So,
Sorry.
Roberto,
did you have?
Yeah, I just wanted to just let everyone know the city council is gonna have a workshop on Monday, and on their end they're gonna have some updates and legal updates and finance updates from their side of things. So it might be worth those of us that have the time to tune in and to see what their side of the conversation looks like, and maybe get better insight into their perspective and the concerns that they have. I didn't make a note of the time of that meeting, but I do know that it's Monday. So once I get the details, I can probably share it with the rest of the board.
Javier, I had cut you off. Did you want to finish?
No, I was just gonna inform the board that I have asked Bruce to proceed with trying to get that, that relief through the method that he suggested, which is through the governor's office. And so we'll work together to do that.
I think that's a good idea. You know, the conversation in the meeting that we had, the city just didn't feel like they can have a meaningful conversation about the budget with so many unknowns at this point, which obviously is understandable. So I think it's just a matter of figuring out how we can meet that practicality.
Yeah. Okay, so if that's settled, then I think we can move on to the into just a little overview of what the implications are from a financial perspective of in the two options that we are looking at. One is, you know, what happens if we don't get a budget before July 1st and we need to operate with the current year's budget, as well as if we need to reduce our tax rate increase. So as you know, and we'll walk through in a couple minutes, the overview of what you were considering when right before we went into the coronavirus crisis. So Miranda, the next slide. So just to put this in context so that you understand why I'm so concerned about having to operate in the present year budget, what we were considering, what we had been working for the past few months to put together and had brought to you first in my presentation and subsequently revised after our first finance committee meeting, is a budget of $122,565,000,000. If we were to have no tax increase at all, so a zero increase in the tax rate because of changes in our state allocation, because of changes in the city's estimated valuation, the one that we were working from, that budget increases to $119,712,000. So you can see that that's still almost a $3 million reduction from where we were a couple of weeks ago. But in the bottom box, you see if we are required to operate under our current budget for the entirety of the year, that leaves us with just slightly over $5 million gap between what it was that we were working from, what we were working towards getting approved, and where we would need to be. So I think that that's, just to sort of put the final emphasis on why I think it's so important to be able to get relief from the charter provisions. I don't want to wind up in a situation where not having that relief forces us into a situation where we have to operate from that current year, the FY20 budget, for the duration of the year. It's one thing, as I said earlier, to do that for a month or something along those lines while we're working our way through a delayed budget process. But as long as that budget process is clean, as long as we can get it, nobody can challenge it on a legal front, then wherever we land is wherever we land, as opposed to basically defaulting into a situation where we have to operate from that $117 million. Does that make sense?
Anybody have questions about that? I don't see any.
All right. So then I'm going to turn it over to Miranda to just walk us through just briefly where we were and how we had gotten there, just to remind everyone of what is and what isn't in that baseline budget that we would have to reduce by $3 million if we were to operate from zero increase, or beyond that if we were to operate under our current budget. So Miranda, do you want to walk through that?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, like the superintendent said, I just wanted to kind of reground everyone with kind of where we left off before everything really went nuts. So as you all recall, the superintendent presented his original proposed budget on March 10th, and that included the reconfiguration proposal. The very next day was when things really started to change, and 2 days, so that Thursday, the 12th of March, we had a finance committee meeting, and that's when the superintendent indicated he was going to withdraw the reconfiguration proposal. And so where we left it that day was we were at that point planning to meet the following Monday, and I was going to come back with a revised publication that basically withdrew the reconfiguration and made the offsetting reductions to investments that we had discussed that Thursday. And so my staff did do that. We put out a revised budget book, and that's available for you on board docs. So I'm not going to go through all the details, but I just wanted to kind of remind everyone now where we are. After that, I think that's where we should start from moving forward, and then we can talk about kind of how to tackle these scenarios that the superintendent just discussed. So the original superintendent's recommended budget was 122.3 million. It's now 122.6 million, and that's simply because when we eliminate the reconfiguration proposal, both revenue and expenditures go up by 300,000 because we get back our CEP revenue that would have been a reduction. So there's no net change to the tax rate with what we eliminated and in terms of the reconfiguration, and then the investments are completely offsetting in terms of the tax rate. We just see both revenue and expenditures go up by 300,000. It makes the expenditure side looks like a slightly higher increase than it did before. Again, that's completely offset by the revenue coming back through CEP. And as I mentioned, just want to reiterate, still a 3% tax rate increase. So the changes that we made, as I pretty much already mentioned, but I'll go straight through. We eliminated the reconfiguration proposal of the elementary schools. We eliminated, to offset that, investments that we were previously proposing in pre-K transportation, ELL supports, special education caseloads, adult ed staffing, and the district website. We reduced the investment in the curriculum scale up. We were able to maintain 125,000 of the proposed 165,000 original investment. We thought we were going to have to reduce it by more, but one small tidbit of good news in the last week that we got was that the MEA announced a cap in terms of the health rate increases that we could see. And so I was able to adjust our health insurance benefits, our health insurance increase estimates slightly for certain bargaining units where I had estimated 7% and the MEA cap was 6%. It's not a huge savings. It was about $60,000. So it was something, and it got us back a little bit of the curriculum scale up investment. So those were the changes. I actually, just so you know, Anna, I don't think as the presenter I can actually see the hands raised, so if there's any questions, just
I do have I have Emily has a question.
Okay.
Emily?
Miranda, I'm sorry, could you just repeat the investment that you are now able to include in terms of the curriculum scale up and what the total had been? I don't have the initial budget in front of me right now.
Yeah, it was going to be 165,000. That was the first, it was in the original budget. And then I think not last Thursday, the 12th of March, when we had our finance committee meeting, we thought we were going to have to drop that down to about 67 or 68,000. And now we're able to be at about 125 now. So 125 of 165. So we've dropped it by 40. Is that the only question?
Yes.
So this is just, this doesn't really represent any changes. This is just reiterating, okay, so what reductions are still included in this revised, superintendent's revised recommended budget. We are still proposing the reduction in 4th and 5th grade Spanish classes, 3 positions at the high school, central office and operations reductions that we've previously discussed, reductions in supplies, and a small reduction in athletics and co-curricular. And the only investments that we were able to maintain after we removed the reconfiguration proposal was the expansion of the pre-K classrooms, which at the end of the day is budget neutral because we have revenue from EPS that offsets the costs of the staffing for those classrooms. As I mentioned, the curriculum scale-up investment at a level of $125,000, and we maintained the investment in the special education autism classroom staffing about $300,000. And just to be clear, for anyone who may not have been at the Finance Committee meeting, if we were to remove this investment, we would see higher costs than this with district outplacements. So this is really not an optional investment. So
I have a question for Marnie.
Mm-hmm.
I just had a question about you had mentioned the languages, and I had a couple of parents asking about the Spanish immersion program and didn't know if that was part of what you mentioned, the language.
It is not.
Okay. Right.
It is not.
Okay.
And this is just my final slide on this topic, a summary of the impact to the budget of all the changes that we made between the original proposed and this revised proposed. So as you can see, removing the reconfiguration increased revenue and increased, well, it increased revenue by $300,000, but it increased expenses by $1.34 million. And then all of the other eliminations that we discussed ultimately offset that down to an increase of cost of $300,000. So a net increase of revenue by $300,000, a net increase to expenses by $300,000, no impact to the tax rate, and actually an increase of 5.3 FTEs over where we originally were. And so this is my last slide on this topic before we kind of move into thoughts on how to tackle the scenarios that the superintendent mentioned before. So if there's any questions, happy to take them. Otherwise, I'll turn it back to the superintendent to start that discussion.
I'm not seeing any questions.
Okay, so then on to the next slide. After our meeting, Chair Trevorrow asked me to think about where, how would we go at arriving at a budget that would reduce, by, $3 million, what we currently proposed. And so these are some of the things that we would ask you to consider if we were in that situation. And so they're pretty self-explanatory, but I'll walk through them briefly. The first one, and this is really only helpful in terms, if we have a short term, so this is more of something that we would use if we were to wind up with a budget that was delayed, and we would potentially hold on hiring vacancies until we actually get a budget. So that's, we just put that one up front because that's not really a savings. That's just a way of, holding ourselves back from spending until it's absolutely, locked in that we have the budget to move forward. We had, as part of the cost savings work group, had discussed the possibility of a retirement incentive, and for a variety of reasons had decided not to move forward with that. And so this is something that we could potentially revisit. We would look at programmatic reductions, things like increasing what we would reduce in our athletics and co-curriculars, as well as other types of programs. We don't have anything specifically, but that's where we would need to go in order to be able to find the kind of resources that we're talking about here. We could remove the proposed curriculum incentive at the curriculum scale up. That was, again, as you saw, now somewhere in the neighborhood of $120,000. So that's the last of the investments that we had discussed moving forward, and that would obviously be something that we would need to consider and look at. We could, look at our professional development budget and look for potential reductions in some of the things that we have scheduled to do over the next year. I think we have started to look at what's in there and how much of that could potentially be reduced. That would be one of the areas where we would come back prepared to go more in depth about that. Staffing adjustments, so reducing FTE further by making modifications to the way that we allocate staff. As the Finance Committee remembers, we talked about going next year and applying a more sort of rational, quantitative-based analysis to our high school staffing, and we're not ready. We don't think that that's fully vetted, but we could use something like that to look for some adjustments in our staffing ratios. We could increase class size, something along those lines at the elementary level, which we had talked about in the context of the elementary reconfiguration. So those are some of the things that we could potentially do to reduce our staffing. We have a significant number of buses that we intend to purchase next year that are in our proposed CIP. It's complex, and we're not ready to get into it today, but that's something that we could delay. It has negative implications in terms of revenue, state revenue, not for FY21, but for FY22. So, it would be, in essence, not making approved purchases this year and then not getting the revenue that would come from the state as a result of making those purchases in 22, but giving us some liquidity in 21. Reducing the number of school days that we currently have. As you know, the state requires 175. We have 176. We could reduce that. That is something that, again, will, just like the next item, will take renegotiating our collective bargaining agreements to be able to do that, because that is, so to be able to do it and actually reduce and make the savings, you would need to reduce the number of contractual days that our teachers and other staff work, and that would, that requires renegotiating the collective bargaining unit agreements. And so the same is true of other benefits, as well as cost of living adjustment steps and things along those lines that are built into those collective bargaining agreements.
I have a couple of questions for you. First, Emily, and then Roberto.
Thank you. I'm wondering about the staffing adjustments. Can you give us a sense of the order of magnitude for the potential high school adjustments? Like, is it 5 positions or 15 positions? Okay.
And just to kind of clarify, after we had our conversation with the city, I asked Javier just to kind of be prepared to talk about directions that he might go in case of, in case we were to kind of hit rock bottom. And, I asked him, not to fully feel like he needed to prepare, scenarios or anything like that. But I just felt that it was good to kind of get this out to the finance committee so that people could see the sort of direction that a worst case scenario our staff would be thinking about. Roberto?
Yeah, so very close to what I was going to say. I was going to ask Javier, what he needed to hear from the board about these options. What kind of guidance do you need from us, or are you just, more of an informative item, just so that we know what you're, the way that you're operating around this?
I mean, I think in terms of guidance, twofold, I guess. First, are we wanting to move forward with the budget planning at this juncture? Knowing that these are the types of items that we would need to consider. So I think that's first and foremost. I know Chair Rodriguez, that you mentioned at the beginning that the option of staying put and not doing anything with the budget until there's more clarity around what the financial picture looks like. I guess that is one option, knowing, in my mind, that's only viable if we're able to get relief from the charter provisions and remove the clouds over the budget. So I think that would be my advice on that, is to move forward until we know that we have the ability to stop. I think that's my main concern. So I think that's one. And then, in this list, are there things that you want us to not look at all? Do you want to understand what the potential range would be for each of these, so I guess that's it. Do you need, do you want us to pursue evaluating all of these and, fully understand what the potential range of savings could be for each of those? I don't want to put things out there that you are not interested in considering and, start a conversation that it's a non-starter.
Roberto, I'm trying to unmute you here. There we go.
And to add to that, Javier, I just want the board also to be aware that, we are aware that the staff all across the district are already, working under very difficult circumstances, and people are overworked and overtaxed right now in ways that they probably have never been. So it's spending bandwidth and capacity looking at these things doesn't seem to be like it's just something that I would caution us to go into at this time with any sense of any sense of like urgency behind it. And then the last thing that I want to say is, and it's hard to say this without trying to laugh, but I want to be clear that at this time, reconfiguration is not even an option to include it into a list of potential cost savings.
That's correct.
I have Emily and then Tim.
Yeah, I fully believe that the time is too uncertain for us to move forward. And I absolutely hear you, Javier, in terms of not waiting too long, but I do think a little bit of time could provide us some more much needed clarity. And so I would not want us to see, I would not want to see us spending a lot of time looking at these potential areas of reduction at this juncture. And then I personally, I mean, since you asked, but I personally would take off of this list renegotiating the collective bargaining agreements, especially at a time when so many people are facing, financial insecurity. I think putting, and are, as the chair talked about, working under very stressful conditions. I think putting this out there as a possibility is not where we want to go.
Tim?
Yeah, thanks. I have similar thoughts to what Emily and Roberto were just sharing. I'm pretty concerned about, particularly talking about staffing adjustments and programmatic reductions, given the anxiety that folks have around employment generally, and just all the uncertainty and the heroic lengths to which our staff are going to continue education in this difficult time. I would not want to add that additional stress, especially since the whole picture is so murky right now. I'm curious about this is a question about the buses, and if there are other opportunities for things that were that are included in CIP now that could be potentially delayed. And just one other question. I'm wondering if we've thought at all about sort of the whole student side of, and I guess the people side of supporting folks coming back into school when the time is right, and making sure that, you know, social and emotional health is strong, and it's probably early to say in terms of when we'll be coming back, what sort of nursing needs, but I'm wondering if there are some additional things that are a direct result of this this pandemic that we need to be thinking about investing in. And understand that, you know, it may be too early to really say on this.
Javier, did you want to address that? Otherwise, I have Mark.
I don't think there was a question there. I think that was
okay. Okay, Mark.
Hi, Javier. If we would want to continue moving forward, you know, until we got that legal relief from the deadlines, which direction would you suggest going? Would we move towards a direction of a budget with a no tax increase, or continue on the path that we were going on before COVID-19?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part.
Or would we continue on as we were before COVID-19, you know, with your original proposed budget?
I think that we were given direction at the city level not to proceed in that direction. And so that's why we're even having this conversation, is that, you know, the discussion that we had was with concern about the revenue for the city and people's ability to pay their tax bills, and to look at reducing our request from the Treasury.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then, what's the suggestion? Are we, until we get the relief from the deadlines, do you suggest we just pause? Or, because you mentioned keep moving forward, but keep moving forward towards what? An alternate goal of no tax increase, a budget with no tax increase?
That's right. Until we get relief, that's, you know, that would be my advice. I mean, we heard from Bruce that, and I don't know if Bruce is still on, but we heard from Bruce that you know, likely the earliest that we would get relief is April 8th. If that relief doesn't come to pass, April 8th is 2 days away from us not being able to meet the two joint finance committee meetings. So, you know, I would be very concerned about just, you know, without that relief, not being able to meet those deadlines. And in terms of what I would move forward towards is, you know, clearly I don't like any of these options, right? So, you know, I was asked to come up with how you would go about cutting $3 million from our proposed budget. And these are the things that we've been able to come up with. And, you know, again, you'll all recall that we had lots of conversations over the course of this year when $3 million looked like a potential, you know, looked like we could potentially have to cut that, right? And these are many of the same things that we were looking at. And, you know, some of these weren't even on the table then. And so now this is our reality that, you know, with reconfiguration, not an option, and, you know, having to cut $3 million after we've already reduced, you know, or, you know, have proposed to reduce the world language programs in the elementary grades, reduced classroom positions in the high schools, and a sundry other reductions that Miranda summarized. This is where we would need to go next.
Marnie did have her hand up, but it's down now. So I have Emily next.
Just so that I have the information, could we go back to elementary school reconfiguration? Would it be possible to put elementary school reconfiguration back on the table, given that our schools are closed and all the operational time it would take to move forward with that? I understand we also need needed a community, more of a community process.
Yeah. And clearly, you know, I think the community process need continues to exist, and that was, you know, the primary concern why we pulled it off the table. But, you know, and I said that it would be a logistical undertaking of significant magnitude, but that I believed we could do that when we were talking about that a few weeks ago, and you know, schools were open. But now in our current state, I don't see any way that we could realistically have, you know, we could realistically do that.
One additional thought is if you know, I guess I will always remain the optimist, but if it comes to the point where we're having to make, you know, we're having to cut millions of dollars from our budget, one question would be, could we do reconfiguration for January or something of that sort?
So anyone else on this? My thought, just in terms of guidance, I agree that we probably should put off having these conversations right now. I think there's too much unknown for us to be able to make these for us to even, you know, prospect out scenarios. I think there is a real problem with having to go back and operate with our previous year budget. And so perhaps in our conversations with the council, we should, kind of reiterate that we need to pick this up by a certain point. I know, Javier, you had said at one point that, maybe you could work for a month in the previous budget, but so, maybe we kind of do a backwards timeline from when we absolutely need to have a budget in place so that we're not in jeopardy of operating with that budget, and try to present that to the council. But I think, obviously it's a grim picture right now from a revenue standpoint. And when we're talking to the counselors, they're not seeing revenue come in. But like Emily said, there is stimulus money in the works. We don't know how that's going to shake out. And so we just really don't know. And so I kind of agree that we don't have information to be able to have these conversations right at this time. Marnie? Marnie? I don't hear Marnie.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yep, there we go.
Okay, sorry about that. No, I really appreciate what you just said, Anna, because I have been raising my hand, lowering it, raising it, lowering it, mostly because I was going to say pretty much what you just said. I completely agree with that. I cannot support having the school reconfiguration back on the table. We took it off for a very significant reason, and upheaval without cause, and already in a state of angst in our community. So I appreciate what you said, Anna. I'd much prefer to hold and wait just to see what's going to happen on the state level, as well as some type of emergency fund. There might be, hopefully, maybe even emergency funds from the federal government. Thanks for that.
Anyone else right now? Is this the last slide in the presentation, or? Okay. So I think we've kind of moved into our next item, which was just a discussion of going forward. And do you feel, Javier, that you've gotten the guidance you need?
So let me tell you what I think I've heard you say. I think I've heard you say that you don't want us to continue to work on the budget until the picture is clearer. And so is that accurate?
From my standpoint, I think so. My thought was to try to figure out what would be our sort of drop dead time that we would need to have a budget in place so that we wouldn't be in jeopardy working too long into our previous year budget, and then kind of maybe backtrack a process from there, and see if we can work with the council on that. And hopefully that will give us enough leeway time. I've got Mark and then Roberto.
Can I just say something before we take another question? I want to just make sure that that I say this for the record. I just want us to understand that we are not guaranteed getting relief from the charter, and that to not be ready puts us at risk of and I know that I'm super conservative on this, but it puts us at risk of then having to live in that budget for the entire year, which is not doable. So, I can do a timeline of when it would be a drop dead if we were to actually then pass a different budget. But I can't draw a timeline that says that if we need to live in this budget, when is the drop dead? The drop dead for that is, making sure that we don't have to live in that budget.
Mark?
Yeah, my thought is for the superintendent and staff to keep working on the budget, looking at a budget that has no tax increases, and then if we get relief, awesome. You know, relief from the deadlines, perfect. But at least we will have started to dig in, and we'll have at least used that time. If we don't get relief, then we're going to have those conversations anyway. So my suggestion is keep working. That's my thought.
Roberto?
Yeah, so I don't know if Bruce is still on, but earlier when he said that he had some sense of optimism about the governor's response to that request, I think he mentioned a date where, as far as when or how frequently the governor is putting out orders. So I'm just wondering what his take is on the turnaround of answering that request, and how much that gives us in terms of perspective for giving guidance to the superintendent to pause or carry on with his work for the budget.
You want me to answer that?
Yes, please.
I've been listening while I cook my dinner. Don't mind me multitasking. I think we're optimistic we can get the governor to address this. The timing is unknown at this point because we just don't know yet. We haven't spoken to her office about when she'd be ready to do that. So April, as I mentioned before, April 8th is the expiration date of her current order, which is, what's today, March 20, it was about 2 weeks from now. I'm not saying it couldn't happen before then. I just don't know. I understand that she doesn't want to be issuing a new order every day or every couple days, but I understand that time is of the essence. So to the extent we can try to make it happen earlier, we can try. I just don't know. She's got a lot of things on her plate, and so I don't know how this fits into her schedule. I realize that's somewhat vague. So just to sum it up again, I think we're optimistic we can get it. The timing is a little uncertain.
Roberto, did you want to respond to that?
Kind of. Just wanted to let board members that are here, and I'll probably send an email separately, but on Monday, I'm going to be on a conference call that the MSMA is organizing or hosting with board chairs and vice chairs from across the state. And it looks like the agenda is mostly around the guidance for remote meetings, but there's going to be an opportunity for us to raise questions for the commissioner and for the governor. So if there's a way for me to frame that question or to address that, and at that time, I don't think it's going to be a direct line with the governor at that time, but it's posted as an opportunity for us to raise questions to them. So if we can summarize this for me to bring it up at that time, I think that'd be more than appropriate for me to do.
Okay. Emily.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer that we haven't, I think largely due to the nature of this call, haven't had the opportunity to talk about how remote learning is exacerbating the existing inequities in our district. And given that we are going to be in remote, our kids will be learning remotely for at least 6 weeks. I hope that is the context and what that means for students' education. I hope that is the context with which, even in this this crisis, unlike anything in generations, we we are very attuned to. I would not myself say that it's that we should be moving forward with a budget with a 0% tax increase, given the impact that that would have on our students' learning, and particularly our students who are already falling behind because we are not providing them the resources that they need to be successful in closing opportunity gaps.
I don't see anyone else at the moment. Javier, do you have thoughts?
No, I mean, I think what I take away is that I'm not moving forward with planning for any of these potential reductions. I heard Mr. Balfont say that he favored that. I heard Mr. Varro and Ms. Figdor say that we did not have enough information to do that. I don't know if you want to formalize that with a vote, or I can just take my guidance from you. And then if that's the case, then I guess I would ask that, and I get that that's probably impossible today, but to think about what would constitute sufficient information to proceed with planning the budget, because that's, you know, we need to have some kind of understanding of what would you need to know for us to be able to begin to plan. You know, you know, those things that are on that list, that's as good as it gets. I don't have other places to go and find, you know, $3 to $5 million. So, you know, at what point do you want us to start pursuing those? Is going to be something that we'll need to know. So, you know, what kind of information do you need to know for us to proceed with our budget planning?
Tim?
Thanks. I'm wondering, the Council Finance Committee has expressed some hesitation around meeting jointly. I am sure that a lot of folks on the city side have many things to do, including counselors and staff. But it seems to me that you know, that is one of the next steps in the process, and it would be valuable for us to get their take on where things are and show them what we're weighing. I'm just thinking back to last year's budget, and I think one of the things we did really well was to present our case and our situation to them, and so that we all understood and we're looking at the issues with the same, you know, through the same window. And I'm wondering, I guess, how feasible would it be to ask them for a joint finance committee meeting so that we can understand, you know, exactly where they're at in terms of tax increase?
So my takeaway from our meeting with them is that they're, at this time, they're just not interested in that at all. And they're taking guidance from their corporation counsel, who doesn't see that they need to do anything with the budget at this time. And it, you know, again, it's because they just don't feel that they have enough information to have meaningful conversations about the budget. I don't know if Roberto or Javier have anything to add to that. No. And of course, I recognize the jeopardy that we're in not having those meetings, and and their feedback is obviously helpful to our process. Emily, I have you next.
I think another piece of information that we need, or pieces of information, is when this, $2 trillion stimulus bill is passed by the House and signed into law, what are the implications of that for the state, for the city, and for our district? And then I guess as needs, this won't be the last bill, as needs continue as needs continue to evolve, continuing to understand what, if any additional steps the feds will take to address needs that could have direct implications for our budget.
Javier, are you comfortable with waiting? Are you comfortable with what we're recommending?
Honestly, given that Bruce believes that we can get relief from the charter provisions through directive from the governor, I feel comfortable waiting. I am incredibly over my head managing day to day of this crisis. Our teachers are busting their tails to meet the needs of students as best we can under the circumstances. And so is all of our staff. Our teachers obviously are on the front lines, but so is Barb, so is Miranda, so is Janet, and so is everybody else that isn't on this call. So I don't cherish the idea of trying to figure out how to cut $3 million in the middle of this crisis, which is what we are in. So I am more than happy to postpone having that conversation. And I know that Emily, that I'm like the glass half empty guy, but I would be more than happy to be the glass half full guy and hope that out of the stimulus and all of that, we would be in a different situation. So if nothing else, being able to sort of, just live in that happy thought world for a while is something that I will gladly grasp onto. And I think, hopefully it's more than just a happy thought, and it's a happy reality in the near future. And, so I think that, Emily's guidance in terms of let's get a handle on what the implications are for local municipalities from the stimulus package is something that those things will start to come into perspective in the very near future. I don't think that we're talking, 3 months to know whether there's actual money coming to Maine, and then for what purposes and all of that kind of stuff. So I think that we'll have a better sense then as to whether there is any pot of gold at the end of that rainbow, which would be awesome. And, if there isn't, then I think we need to, confront the realities, and we'll do that when we know that.
I think that's the best we can do right now, is hope for the best with getting something from the governor and just move on when we know more.
Yep.
So I don't have anybody else with their hands up. Did we have any last agenda items or wrap-up thoughts? Seeing none, I guess we're, Roberto.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is the right time or maybe Tuesday at our board meeting, but when we approved the continuity of education plan, you talked about some of the cost increases associated with that. Obviously that wasn't part of the agenda today, so I don't expect anyone to be prepared to talk about that. But if at some point, either through the finance committee or in our next board meeting, if we can have a more of an update of what those costs have been, and for us to understand what the continuity of education and continuity of care, what they are doing to our expenses. I think that would be important for us to understand.
And we talked, Roberto, about doing an update on how things are going at the meeting on Tuesday. So that's on the agenda, and we will include that as part of that.
All right. Well, unless there's anything else, I guess we will take a motion to adjourn. So does somebody want to raise their hand?
Mark did.
Okay. Mark, seconded by Emily. And are we going to, because we're taking a vote, are we going to poll that?
I think we have to.
Okay, so Emily? That's a yes from Emily. And Mark, I don't have his face up on.
We have some people on the phone only, not necessarily connected. So I think it might be.
Oh, unmute them. Okay.
That actually say that, yes, she's in favor of adjournment.
Okay, so let me do, Emily, you're unmuted, so go ahead.
Yes.
And Mark?
Yes.
And I'm also in favor. And so we are adjourned. All right, thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you, Janet.